Shalom. We are here today, March 18th, 2014, 16th Badar, with Rabbi David Ingber, the Rabbi of Congregation Rabbi, New York City. Shalom, Rabbi, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
Happy to be here.
Rabbi, how do you prefer to be called?
David.
Rabbi David. I interviewed Rabbi Zalman not long ago, and did he also teach you to make a bracha before an interview?
No? Curious, what bracha did he make?
For it to be matzliach, for God to be here, to be
present.
To be present.
I can get on with that, that's nice.
Let me introduce you. Rabbi David is named by Newsweek as one of the 50 most influential rabbis in the United States, as well as one of the Forward's 50 most newsworthy and notable Jews in America. Rabbi David promotes a renewed Jewish mysticism that integrates meditative mindfulness and physical awareness into mainstream postmodern Judaism. A major 21st century Jewish thinker and educator, his rich perspective, open heart and mind, and full-bodied approach to Jewish learning has brought him to speak throughout the United States and worldwide. Wow, you're young for a celebrity.
Tell that to Justin Bieber.
The truth is that if all I knew was that he was ordained by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shlomi, the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement, whom I interviewed last year, I probably would not need any other introduction. But Rabbi David arrived at the renewal stage, where he's often on stage, following much personal seeking and learning from wide cross-section of sacred traditions and faith. I personally find Rabbi David multiple facets, rich, complex, and forever surprising me. A philosopher and a mystic, a thinker and a spiritual seeker, and always a storyteller that tries to elevate himself through elevating others. But I understand that your search was not always easy. Can you share with us, please, how you arrived here?
First of all, thank you. It's nice to be here, thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. My upbringing was in the modern Orthodox world. I basically went to yeshiva day schools. I went to Ramaz in New York City. And I had a very powerful, transformative experience having a gap year in Israel, 1987 to 1988. I basically had a very powerful religious and spiritual awakening that deepened over the course of the next 5 years as I went from yeshiva in Israel to yeshiva in Brooklyn, a place called Chaim Berlin. I was also at YU for a bit. So a period of about 5 years where I was very immersed in what some would call the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredi community in Israel and in New York. And when I was about 23 years old, I essentially decided that I needed to leave Judaism for a whole set of complex reasons. But that began, the next stage of my awakening, which was my exposure to Eastern practices, to the counterculture and the human potential movement, which had many different therapeutic experiences of spirituality that wasn't Jewish. A lot of Buddhism and yoga, essentially, over the course of the next 10 years. And I was basically waiting tables here in New York City, making a living that way, and during the day I was studying with various teachers. That was the second start of my journey. I eventually came back to Judaism, what I consider to be a renewed Jewish experience in my 30s.
When you were in Brooklyn and about maybe to leave Judaism for whatever reason, I think it was quite a difficult period. It was a little dark period, it was an unhappy period, having to do with your Jewish experience. You want to share with us? Because we have a lot of people who think it's their fault, and sometimes there is no fit, and a lot of people may leave Judaism because they were just not at the right place.
Yeah.
You represent multiple roads in Judaism, and maybe that's the greatest thing about renewal, which we'll get to, is that there's not only one menu. It's a la carte.
Well, I mean, listen, I left Orthodoxy because of a slew of reasons. One was that it just so happens to be that Orthodoxy, in certain iterations of Orthodoxy, and some of the unhealthier aspects or the more neurotic aspects of people who have issues, is reflected often and maybe exacerbated by certain teachings and certain ways of thinking about the religious life that are presented within Orthodoxy.
The more ascetic?
I would say that the traditions that try to suppress doubt and try to some degree to impose authoritarian structures that basically tell you that you're not good enough and that you can never do it good enough. And those are kind of the same critique that I think certain Hasidic teachings had against the kind of the movement of asceticism and the approach to the body. You can still find them prevalent within certain parts of Orthodoxy, and you can actually wake up one morning and say, wow, I'm not healthy. This isn't a healthy approach. It's not healthy to my body. It's not healthy to me finding what I believe, aside from what the tradition tells me.
So is it the blind faith or the authoritarian part of it? Because faith, we know, is blind. But I think you're talking both of blind faith and authority, authoritarian religiosity.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous cocktail. If your self is not sufficiently established, if you have within you voices that are self-doubting voices, they can be exacerbated, can be made even worse through certain forms of orthodoxy. But my experience was that during that period, I was exposed to a kind of toxic orthodoxy.
As a child, when do you remember yourself feeling God independently for the first time? When did you choose God?
Such a good question. I have memories of being 3 or 4 years old. I think it was 4 years old, and telling my mother and father that at night I was talking to God before I would go to bed, and that I had the covers over my head, and I felt like it was a private space for me and Hashem to connect. That's early, but I remember throughout my young adult life that I was in almost a constant conversation with God.
Did you ever go back there to that child under the blanket with the space with God?
Of course. First of all, I think I go back there every time I put my talit, my prayer shawl over my head. I think that I'm right back in that place.
What a beautiful image to say that your private space is not different as a child under the blanket as you under the talis.
Yeah, that's my, I used to feel that Hashem, that God was with me. During beautiful moments like that, I said I had a running conversation with God, and I felt that God was very close. During difficult times in my childhood, I felt I would have Hashem would be a friend for me.
Did you have crisis about your relationship with God as a child?
I remember as I grew up, I remember when the reality of evil began to impose itself. I remember feeling that someone was taking away God from me. And I remember reading Harold Kushner's book on when bad things happen to good people. And I remember struggling with that book and wanting to defend orthodoxy against that book and wanting to explain the book to other people. I remember I think it was 12 or 13, and I read the book. Yeah, I felt a very strong loyalty to defending that God was good, and God was loving, and that God was
yours.
That God belonged to me.
And how do you deal with this issue now?
How do I deal with that issue? It's a good question.
It's an issue that travels throughout life.
It's a question throughout.
Of course.
Every tradition. How does one work with difficulties, evil, suffering? It's a huge question. I think that the way that I work with it personally is that because I've had so many deep and abiding experiences of God, my faith in God is rooted in an experience, not in an idea.
Is it fair to say that you have faith and that's yours, and everything else that happens is outside, and you just choose how far you allow things to come into your temple, into your castle?
My enduring faith is in a taste of a God that is beyond good and evil. When you're working with somebody who's actually been through a traumatic experience, or who has experienced or tasted suffering in their life, my theologies and what are called theodicies, my in-depth defense of God's goodness doesn't work. I don't think theodicy or theology works to explain evil in any way. I think that for me personally as a rabbi, I've had experiences of a God that is beyond good and evil. My God answers the question, why is there something instead of nothing? That's the primary religious question. Why is there something instead of nothing? And from that place, which I've experienced, not an idea, but an experience, I then come into the world where there is good and evil, a world where there is a good God's face and the Havdil, a bad God's face. And I hold both of those as a mystery. So what I offer is, in comfort, is I don't know, but my faith can help me hold the mystery of how this is possible. And that ultimately it's always a choice, either to accept the goodness of the flower and have faith that evil will somehow make sense, or to say that evil makes sense and that I don't understand the flower. And those are always the two choices that are available to us.
Since you mentioned choices, maybe the free choice
is to choose
a life where good and evil coexist.
Yes.
Or to choose that you don't want to look at this altogether.
It's a deeper expression of our freedom to choose, is to choose to see the world honestly, to not be Pollyannish about it, to not offer up simplistic, overly simplistic, Pollyannish, simple answers to very profound questions. After the Holocaust, after Auschwitz, Adorno wrote, "There can't be poetry," right? And after Auschwitz, there are no theodicies, there are no defenses of God's quote unquote absence from history. But what we say is that we have faith in something that transcends both the good and the evil, and that we are able to affirm that in moments when we don't understand.
Discussing good and evil, especially evil, I think Holocaust is very confusing. I choose to talk about the pain of one person. I think we jumped ahead and we'll get back to that. Going back to your childhood, who were the most influential people in your life as a child?
My twin brother is a very important person in my life. My father, my mother. I had a number of teachers that were very influential for me when I was much younger. I would say that I was a very avid athlete, and so there were certain athletes that were very important to me. I played a lot of hockey, so my hero in hockey was a Russian hockey player named Vladislav Tretiak. He was a great Russian goaltender.
You had his cards?
I had his cards. I wore his jersey. I became number 20 when I played for Ramaz.
This affected who you are today?
I think that it had a major impact on my life when I was, in terms of my self-formation, in terms of my identity. I felt very strongly that I drew strength from that. But I didn't have a lot of heroes as a young man, I think. I think that my teachers were much later on in my life than much younger.
As you may know, my theme is about tradition and its transmission throughout the generations, where families had Zaydis and Bubis who infused their families with the Jewish way. Did you enjoy having a Zaydi or a Bube? And whom do you see fulfilling that role for our younger generation?
My grandfather was quite a character, Alexander Ingber. We call him Ali. I have very old memories. I think I was very young when my brother and I used to stay over in Forest Hills at at Ali's house. Ali was my Zaydi, and Ali, everything from the way that he went to shul on Shabbos morning, to the kind of breakfast that he put out with Polish bread and farmer's cheese and sliced hard-boiled eggs, and what he would bring to the young Israel of Forest Hills when we would go to shul, and how we would sit in shul. He was the first one that had us go up to say Adon Olam and Anim Zmiros and do that kind of thing at the end of shul. So my Zaydi Ali was a very formative Jewish role model. That was certainly the case. And I have many memories of our Pesach Seders, where my father and grandfather and my uncle Joey would sing the sing-song of the Haggadah. They had their unique Ingber nusach for the Haggadah, the way that we would say the Haggadah, Kimo shenema da-da-da-da-dee-dum, da-da-da-dee-dum, da-da-da-dee-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dee-da-da-dum. It's like say Ulman ma bikesh lavan harami. That was the way that in Ingber Seder happened.
We're going to have it soon.
And God willing, we have it in 1 month. So I have all of those kind of mixing together, like my bubby, also with kind of the way that they were. That was very Jewish and was very Jewishly aligned, and that was very formative.
Are we going to still have any of this?
So you're asking me a larger question: are we going to have bubbies and Zaydis?
And if we don't have that 3,000-year-old Zaydis and Bubis, who is going to play that role? That out of the ballpark, bigger than life, not judging and not being judged, Zis, sweet candy, that will be for us. I'm always amazed that people who are totally secular, Jews, will say, well, I cannot marry a non-Jew. My grandfather will turn around in his grave. I mean, that influence of the Zaydi and the Bubi, they don't say the same thing. The phrase doesn't apply to mother and father so much. Who's going to play that role in the future?
It says in the pasuk that the threefold cord is not easily broken. Chutam meshulash lo bimhera yinatek. And there's something to be said for the fact that it wasn't until there was a Yaakov Avinu that we could say that this that this has a kiyum, and this is a family that has longevity. We often focus on Yaakov, but really Yaakov is the first grandchild, meaning he's the one that makes Avram Avinu into a grandfather. And there's something very important about having, shlosha avot. It's very important to have babis and zaydis, to have.
It's a quorum.
It's a quorum, but it's also what Reb Zalman, my teacher, often says is an Oedipal ally. That my father is the person that I might have my own issues and struggles around identity, and he might have had struggles and issues around with his father. But my grandfather is someone who can see me without some of the challenges that make it difficult for children to be seen by their parents and for parents to be seen by their children. Maybe this is the deeper meaning of why v'heshiv levavos al banim v'lebanim al avosam, that by the Nevuah, the prophecy in Malachi and Malachi, has to do with the reconciliation between parents and children, and not between children and their grandparents. There's something very beautiful.
Issue is my friend.
Right, your issue is my friend. So the person you have issues with, and I have issues with, we can identify together. So there's something very. I just wanted to say that as a frame, Sally. And so I think that we'll obviously always have grandchildren and grandparents. I think what you're pointing to is actually not. It's more than that. You're saying, will we have the kind of continuity of practice and the continuity of lineage where 3 generations or 2 generations, there is a sense of that being continued, there's something being passed on from one generation, ledor vador, that it's being passed on from generation to generation in a way that is where people can say my Jewish identity is not just from my parents, but it's also from my grandparents. And there's also the tam, which is what you're saying, which is, I mean, we might not have babis and zaydis. We have grandma and grandpa, right?
Can you associate it with exile? We're exiled. We don't have the full experience. It's like we don't have the temple, so it's not full experience on Eretz HaKodesh. We don't have the Zayd and Bilbi. It's like we're exiled from our own full family experience.
Here's the question I have for you. If you mean, are we going to have a continuity? I think that's a great question. I think we will. If you're going to ask me, though, will there be something beyond just continuity? There's something of a tam, something that is given over that isn't something that can be given over in a book, or isn't something. It's given over in a gesture, in a caress. I know that when I left Judaism for 10 years, completely. And one of the things when people ask me what brought me back to Yiddishkeit, I often say it was because coming back to being underneath my blanket and being underneath the talis. When I was under my father's talis during Duchening, when they would do the priestly blessing in the synagogue, I remember my father's left hand on my cheek. And having my father's left hand on my cheek was very much a sense that I wanted to come home. So you say, you have babis and zaydis. We're going to have grandparents for whom Judaism wasn't just a group of laws or identity, but it was something. It was a tam, it was a taste, it was something beyond. And that is something that you can't teach, but it has to be an immersive experience, right? Someone will say, like you ask somebody, a guy in a restaurant here on the Upper West Side, I always used to go in when I was not connected to Judaism. His name was Sammy Stern. And he didn't do a thing that was Jewish. But Sammy Stern was very, very Jewish. And there's something that he was that was transcending a particular behavioral norm. It was something that he was giving over.
And I think instead of having personal Zaydis and Bubis, if we can have collective, under the tent Zaydis and Bubis, for you, Sammy was a Zaydi image. And I think as our life are less clan-oriented and more dispersed, it's not unlikely for somebody to have a child in LA and a child in Israel and a child in Canada.
Yeah.
So I think just like you have a Hillel in university and a Chabad, I think we should agree to institute sharing the elders.
Yeah.
Just like we're saying we should go for Chesed, going to old age home to help them, and we get help in the process.
Yeah.
If we go to help the elderly, we get to share that Zaydi flavor that maybe we didn't have. And that is a concept to be brought to the bima, to the shul.
You know, I think in some way when you talk about Romamu, when you talk about the synagogue, one of the things about Romamu that people will often say is that it reminds them of something very old and yet very new.
Yeah. But we're getting now to renewal.
Sure.
Whenever your name is mentioned, Rabbi David, it's always in the context of renewal. So Rabbi David Ingber has been the spiritual leader for many in the New York metropolitan area. And when I say spiritual, I mean spiritual with a capital S, or maybe capital Nun for Neshama. Rabbi, you welcome everybody, every Shabbat, where you rock your congregation Romamu in a fusion, crossbreed style that includes ancient prayers, sacred text, stories, and a lot of singing. How do you do it, and who are your congregants?
I think that what happens at Romamu is basically a canvas on which all of the different colors of my life are painted. I was formed in the crucible of Shlomo Carlebach and Hasidic Nigunim. I was exposed to meditation in Jewish forms and in Buddhist forms, and I was also exposed to body movement, and I'm a little bit of a performer. I was also a bit of an actor during my period. And so if you bring all of these things together, it's a very authentic expression of a kind of hybrid that I think that I'm not the only representative of that hybrid. I think it is classically Jewish renewal in its deep rootedness in the past. And it's classically renewal in its capacity to say that something can be greater than the sum of its parts. It's both the tropes of a typical Kabbalat Shabbat or a typical Shabbat morning service or a typical Havdalah service, but with various other pieces that come in to change it. The spices are different, the inflection points are different. There's stories in English and there's Hebrew texts and translated, and then there are also, you know, more universal wisdom traditions that are synthesized.
We need an inner yes, Reb Zalman says. Just as we might decide that our physical health is something we need to set aside time and money for, we need to budget for soul stuff too. We have to set aside soul dollars and soul hours, even perhaps soul days, every once in a while. The great Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the great Hasidic Rebbe, used to say before he went to sleep at night, Master of the universe, today I didn't do so well. I promise tomorrow that I will do better. Immediately he would chide himself and say, Lev Yitzchak, that's what you said last night. But tonight he'd reply to himself, tonight I really mean it.
What I want to find is, I want to find a uniquely Jewish voice for a more generic, universal conversation about spirituality in the heart. And so that's how I do it.
It's like you're looking for the unified theory of physics, but...
without losing the particularity.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in being Jewish for the sake of being Jewish. Like, I'm interested in being deeply rooted in my tradition, deeply identified as a Jew, but knowing that Judaism is playing its instrument in the symphony of spirit. That Judaism is one organ within the larger body of the universal yearning for spirit. I don't assume that Judaism has all of the answers to all of the questions. In fact, I think that imagining that Judaism has all the answers for all of the questions is actually to be blinded to where Judaism needs to listen to other instruments in the symphony in order to be able to hear what it can't offer.
And leads to the wrong message.
It leads to the wrong message.
God wants us to be inclusive and not exclusive.
Yeah, and it also becomes a conversation about truth.
You embody the multi-face of the word renewal itself.
Yes.
Because we can take renewal as moving on with the times, right? I mean, we had sacrificial lamb, now we don't have sacrificial lamb for whatever reason.
For whatever reason, yeah.
We had multiple wives, now we don't have multiple wives
Right.
for whatever reason. There was no Shulchan Aruch, there is. We didn't even have a siddur, then we had a siddur. So the idea of renewal is part of Jewish experience.
Absolutely.
You're saying that you want to bring yourself to that renewal, because the classic Jewish experience is that there are things you leave outside the shul. When you enter the shul, when you enter the Beit HaMikdash, as the model of that shul
Right.
experience, because the shul is a new concept of Mikdash Katan or Mikdash Me'at, we leave our persona outside. We wash to wash ourselves from
Yeah.
who we actually were outside. And then when we come in, we conform to that Jewish experience. For you, renewal, the other side of the coin of renewal is you want to have a Rabbi David Ingber shul where all of your experiences are part of the shul, of the experience. You don't leave things outside the shul. You bring everything in.
To some degree, it would be disingenuous of me to say that, like, I'm not bringing in my hockey playing self into shul. I'm not advocating that we should actually have ice skating during services. I'm not advocating...
If you thought it would help, you would.
But what I'm advocating for is, and what we are doing, is actually something that's been done for generations. The son of the Rambam, Avram ben Rambam, was a renowned Sufi. He was very much involved in bringing in Sufi practices into 13th century Jewish practice in Egypt. Avram ibn Ezra, Abraham Abulafia. We have always had teachers who were positioned within a zeitgeist, within a particular period of Jewish history, who had reciprocal influence from various other elements that were in the pre-existing culture or in the existing culture, and who integrated in a kind of what one author called a kind of flexigidity, flexible enough to create, to incorporate, and structured enough to actually hold on to that integration. So renewal is actually not doing anything that's not already being done in openly and overtly in Reform, Reconstructionist, and conservative movements, and less overtly in orthodoxies, which kind of cover up the reciprocal influences of the existing cultures. And what you have in renewal is a kind of neo-Hasidism. You have a progressive liberal approach to many, many different issues, but you have it deeply rooted in the Jewish mystical and Kabbalistic tradition. And the blending is unique. It's absolutely unique in the 20th and 21st century.
So in the defense of the personal Rabbi David's renewal, is that Rabbi David actually is trying to bring in the things from the environment, not from his own particular...
I'm a poster child. I'm a lightning rod. I went on my own personal journey that actually is personal, but it's universal in that many, many, many people who are coming through Ramamu's doors and who would otherwise come through other doors are actually those who have experienced a more direct spiritual connection. Like if you look at the landscape, Sali, of American religious and spiritual life, the largest number of those who are identifying religiously are saying that they are spiritual but not religious. That's the largest group in America that are...
Do you think they know what it means?
But what they're saying, they don't. But what they're saying more often than not is, what we're interested in is we want to have a ta'amu u're'u ki tov Hashem.
I think the biggest attack for renewal
Yeah.
is that you happen to be a good renewal. Reb Shlomo was a good renewal, and Reb Zalman and Kaplan were a good renewal, but Shabtai ben Tzvi was not a good renewal. If renewal goes on the flavor of the rabbi, then we might have a spiraling out of control. But you are saying the responsibility of you as a rabbi in the renewal movement is to renew responsibly, to renew in the context of a larger picture, not to renew with what you just happen to wake up that morning with. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people who hear renewal don't understand. The renewal is not just like a personal trip. I woke up in the morning and I decided to have a shul, minyan in Grand Central.
There's no way to have a complete quality control in a post-Enlightenment world where authority is not centralized. We can't rein in all of the people that are going to have startup companies and call them, let's say, a coffee shop. I'm going to start a coffee shop, and I'm going to start it and I'm going to call it coffee, but it's going to be beet juice. I'm going to call it coffee. There's too much in the marketplace for people to be fooled by your faulty advertisement. The same thing is true. We assume there are thousands of people who start shuls or churches or synagogues, and they call it whatever they want to call it, and people will go and they'll be able to compare and see if it's an authentic expression. The question really is not whether or not you can rein in if people are going to start things and make a claim that isn't there. The question is, if you train people and give them the tools, and presumably if you've been immersed in any rabbinical program that exists out there that's successful, you will be imbued, hopefully, with certain core principles of what has been done. And you'll use your own discretion to try to create as much contiguity between what was, what is, and what will be, and so that what you are doing is backwardly compatible, that it has some connection with Bubby and Zadie's. Will they be able to recognize it? Would a Bubby and Zadie be able to understand even the frummest people who are doing stuff online now? I mean, they might not understand what online means. Yeah. We learn from them. We try our best to learn and integrate and be in a very deep relationship and conversation with what they have given us. But our responsibility is to ask a different question than our Bubbies and Zadies ask, because that's our chiyuv. You know, they said about one of the Rebbes, I think it was Reb David Lulav or Noach of Lulav, that when his father passed away, he was a Hasidic Rebbe, his son, I think it was Rav Noach, took over. And when he took over, he did things completely differently than his father. And the Hasidim, the adherents, were very, very concerned, because here there was a clear break from his father's way. And so they appointed one of the elders to go and speak to him. And they said to him, you know, B'chavod, b'dechilu rachimu, you know, the Rebbe is not following in his father's footsteps. And he said to them, listen to me and listen carefully. I'm exactly like my father. They said, no, it's not true. You're doing... No, he said, no. My father did it the way that he felt that he had to do it, and I do it the way I feel that I have to do it. That's what my father taught me. This is what I have to do. My father trusted me enough and gave me enough confidence to go out into the world and live in integrity with what was done.
That's how our Avinu B'Shamayim did to us. He put us and he said, I trust you. He's a free choice. We're modeled and tested.
Right. I mean, the Midrash says, listen, that God brings Adam Rishon over all of the trees of the Garden of Eden. He says to him, right, be careful that, you know, I gave you this world, and be careful that you don't destroy everything that I've given you. So to some extent, our Bubbies and Zadies are giving us a beautiful tradition. But Reb Zalman has a beautiful way of thinking about this. He says there are some animals in the world that have a skeleton on the outside, and some of us have skeletons on the inside. And the hope is that even though the posture sometimes has to have a skeleton on the outside to make sure that nothing, we have to be impermeable sometimes to any outside influences. We have to, you know, circle around the wagon and make sure that nothing gets in. But he said the ideal is that we have an inner vertebra. We have our skeleton on the inside, meaning there is a sense of integrity that is internalized to such a degree, like you've been to my shul, Sali, and other people come to my shul. And when you come to Romamu, I think people have a deep feeling that what I'm doing is contiguous. There's a sense of, it touches the soul, but it's also connected. It's also connected. So we need rabbis like that. Like, you know, what's happening here in America with the Pew Study. If we don't create new modes and new ways of connecting with people, it's not going to work.
You're meeting at a shul inside a church at the West End Presbyterian Church at 105th Street in Amsterdam Avenue. Is it a temporary home, or does it represent a joint cross-religious effort? How is it working out, and what are your plans for the future?
We want to build a shul for the 21st century. And the synagogue for the 21st century, much like Mordechai Kaplan's vision, has to be more holistic. Mordechai Kaplan had an idea with a shul with a pool. Our idea is actually much broader than that. We want a synagogue center that repositions all of Jewish life as practice, and that includes other practices to support the body, practices to support the heart and the mind. So we want to build a synagogue with a fully operational yoga studio that would compete with the best yoga studios in New York City area. We want to build a shul that is, as Roman is already, a shul for body, mind, and spirit. We want to we have plans to start a yeshiva, the first ever egalitarian neo-Hasidic yeshiva, an integral yeshiva that teaches not only Hasidic and other Jewish texts, but also techniques of transformation like yoga and body and movement and voice. And we want to build it here in New York City. It's going to cost us quite a bit of money. The church that we currently have is not our ideal scenario. Our ideal situation is actually to find a space of our own and to do programming with multiple faiths. But we'd like to we have a community that demands and needs its own space at this point.
But you're not opposed to having more than one faith sharing a facility?
No, I'm not opposed to that.
So why not a mosque on Friday, a shul on Shabbos, and a church on Sunday?
It's a tricky question.
All of these are tricky questions.
No, this one's trickier. There's renewals, deep ecumenism, and then there's my personal stuff. Like, I would prefer not to be in a shul with a church and the mosque and all this.
You're a part of a long tradition of what is ever-changing renewal. Rav Kaplan was renewal, as was Reb Shlomo and Rav Zalman and others. What is your renewal? How far does it reach and where does it start?
I don't know how far it will reach. I'm a student of Reb Zalman's. I think that my vision is very much consistent with Reb Zalman's vision of a very deeply traditional renewal. I advocate for a little bit less renewal and a little bit more tradition at this point. I'm a big fan of not renewing all of the forms. I love many of the forms in Judaism. I think that in some circles I'm considered to be on the more traditional spectrum and within renewal.
There's a rule, you cannot go too far where you don't see the shore. You know, into the ocean, if you go too far from seeing the shore, the lifeguards gets hysterical.
Yeah.
You know, the whole point of you mentioning renewal with the traditional or not going all the way goes into an intuition I had once when we shared some holiday, I don't remember, in somebody's apartment, Upper West Side. And when it came time to say the Shmoneh Esrei, the Amida, you said, and you can say it however you're comfortable, but then you added, but better stand up. And I had a strong sense of your orthodoxy, that you were dancing on those two fields. One is what the rabbi feels and one is what the rabbi preaches. The rabbi preaches or teaches people who come from everywhere, but the rabbi feels very orthodox. And it's a phenomenon that actually is going throughout our Jewish renewal experience. Conservative and reform movement often have rabbis who are, admittedly or not, orthodox. So where is that balance between your orthodox and your renewal?
You know, for Purim I was going to come dressed as a chassid, but my wife said it wasn't going to be a costume, so I didn't wear it. And I sometimes say that I'm an inverted Oreo cookie. I'm like white on the outside and black on the inside. I have a very strong connection with Chassidus and with Orthodoxy. And even when I do things that are very radically different than I grew up with, I try to find something that I can bring over, I can carry with me. It's very important when we're all standing together. It's important for people to stand if they can, to say the Amida.
Respect.
It's respect, but it also is a form. So much Torah has been written about what Amida means. I think that unless we have a good ethical reason to change something, that it behooves us to try our best to keep it as it is. You know, I think there's a lot of Torah has been written about a lot of things, but if it's ethically, morally problematic, and then it's worth looking into changing it. But there are a lot of things that are neutral that people just change because they're lazy, and I don't countenance that.
So,
like I don't like it when people change Shema, and they sometimes say Ya Eloheinu, Ya Echad. I think no, too many people in the Jewish tradition died saying the Shema, those 6 words exactly the way I was taught them. There isn't, for me, a good enough argument to change that.
how about using God's name instead of Hashem? If people ask you what should we say, would you say whatever you feel, or use God's name only when in the context of reading the Torah or Torah learning?
That I feel very strongly about preserving that as well. I think there's something important about not saying.
So you want to preserve
there are many
a lot
things I want to preserve.
so we can see the shore and not go too far
I
away.
have a lot. I mean, my own personal life is extremely boundaried by halakha, and
So it's a very important statement here. Renewal goes only so far, but we keep the old tradition.
it's Reb Zalman. I mean, Reb Zalman himself is a living embodiment of these things. Reb Zalman is such a huge Talmid Chacham.
But sometimes using a name of a movement that has so many different connotations, you kind of lend yourself to criticism that is undue. If you call traditional renewal, then there's nothing like that. And then we'll say, oh, they combine both. I'm going to go to a place that says traditional renewal. It's not like those renewal who are like...
It's a branding problem.
You're big on talking about essence. It's an essence problem. So when you think about the new shul...
Listen, whenever people used to criticize Jews, I used to say, and use it as a way of talking about Judaism, I'd say, that's Jews, not Judaism. Look at Judaism. Don't blame renewal Judaism for what renewal Jews do.
Yeah.
Renewal Judaism is in its heart, and
It's a search.
It's in Reb Zalman's own. Those are the primary sources for Jewish renewal.
You're talking about Rav Zalman as if he is mainstream orthodoxy. We are talking so much about feelings, and we bring in the Eastern religions, and we always say what I feel like, I feel like, I feel like, I feel like. But let's say that God's Judaism, the Torah and the mitzvot, is like a precision tool. You have to explain how far does feeling, spirit goes, and how far and how far should we take it, and not get away from what is the core, the precision tool of God's Torah.
It's a bit of a dangerous metaphor because, of course, that's exactly what rabbis and then the Rambam and then, of course, Isaac Luria in particular did, or the Kabbalists in general did, is actually argue very strongly for the precise perfection of Jewish practice and Jewish texts based on the notion that there is some more mechanistic way that it works. Like you do A and it produces B, and one shouldn't in any way tamper with A because, or that mechanism itself is so precise that even if you don't understand it, you should just do it. It actually becomes a recipe for obedience without understanding in a certain way. Because listen, like for example, there are Kabbalistic texts that say that there are 70 words exactly in the Kiddush on Friday night. So once you say that there are 70 words in the Vayichulu and Mekadesh Shabbat, for the Kabbalists it means that number 70 is significant because there are 70 is a very special number, 7 times 10. You wind up becoming so infused with the exact nature of those 70 words because there's a metaphysical structure that if you don't say those 70 words, the things that have to happen in the celestial worlds don't happen, and that causes all kinds of horrendous things here in this world. It's very dangerous. There's a way to not throw out all of that beauty with the bathwater. The bathwater is that if you argue that way, it hampers and it limits. It acts as a limiting agent on renewal because it sees renewal as tampering with a mechanistic structure.
But for some people, that was renewal. Kabbalah was renewal.
Right. Right. But what I'm saying here is you have to hear it out. That one piece of renewal that's important is number one, even those who believed in God's Torah being absolutely perfect renewed the tradition. They found ways.
They have to.
Chazal renewed. Chazal found a way within the Torah to renew the Torah. So
we have to. We were sent to Bavel. We had to renew the Torah. We were sent to Europe. We were sent to renew the Torah.
The system's renewal is embedded within the system.
Of course. You're a very inspiring speaker, and you often talk about feeling God, talking to God, and more. I ask you to share with us your sense of love of God, and how can one love God who is so omnipotent? Isn't it like a contradiction of terms? Loving the king, but the king does whatever he wants, and he is not only doing it for us. Love is a personal thing. How can we love a general God?
I think that there are mature loves and less mature loves. I think that when my children look at me, they see me as omnipotent. And they also know that I'm a benevolent.
To them.
They experience me that way. And I think that in my experience of the divine, there are multiple frames. I think that I do experience God as a loving parent. I feel God as a lover. I feel God as a friend. When I imagine that the gift of being alive is given freely to me, I feel gratitude, and the gratitude itself is love. And I feel that when I contemplate what it is when I say God, who it is, what's the address, I immediately feel a sense of yearning to know more about the mystery that is God.
Is it fair to say that the beginning of loving God is understanding that you got something for free, that you got something for nothing, that you were gifted something that you had no claim, and out of that gift you can sprout out a love for this immensity, that giving to you was personal. He may be a general God, but he gave you a personal gift. There's no more personal than you to you.
The fact that I am
So that makes it easy to love even an omnipotent God, because he reached down, especially being so omnipotent, he dressed and came to your place to give you to you.
I also listen. I'm also like Spinoza and Maimonides, and then I have a kind of intellectually amorous relationship with God.
I see you always looking for a better word, a better story, a better image. You're always climbing. If I have to think of you, close my eyes and think of Rabbi David, I think he's always climbing. He's always trying to better himself. And I think you're just accidentally there in front of us. You're working on yourself all the time. And that is, I think, what inspires people beside the entertaining you, is because you're so honest about opening yourself and trying so hard to get to a better, higher place than you were yesterday or a minute ago. Where do you draw this inner power to give your whole, like you leave nothing behind?
You know, I think that ultimately my own emotional, spiritual, and mental health is directly related to my spiritual seeking. I want to live a life that is more courageous, more exposed, more loving.
More.
Yeah. It's like there's a teaching that the word Adam, which means human, is connected with the word Ma'od, which is more. Adam and Ma'od are the same letters. Ma'od, you know, as Rav Nachman said, you know, Azam Elohai be'odi, I will sing to God with my moreness, my od. Be'od shali. Well, I have yearnings. Like,
yearnings.
You know, one of the things,
it's okay to have yearnings.
Not like that. It's one of the defining features of being a human being is to be ba'al she'ifot, to have someone who has yearnings. I like to say often that people in our country talk about earning statements, but really it's your yearning statement. It's your annual yearning statement is really the most important thing. Like, Sama nafshi l'Elohim le'elchai, I really want more of that. I want more of that connection with what's alive, what's true, what's whole. That's what I want for myself. And I know nobody knows how not whole I am as much as I know.
But this is our human predicament.
And I'm not embarrassed about it.
And we are the same in that way.
Absolutely.
Not you, but you and I.
There's nothing as whole as a broken heart. So the truth is that I'm whole in the sense that I'm not complete. That is an incompletion to me that drives me to some extent. But I'm also whole in that place. So there's a bit of a paradox. When I imagine myself to be whole, I'm really broken. When I realize that I'm broken, I'm really whole. 12 Steps is the most successful spiritual program probably ever produced in this country. And it's because it meets people in their hungry ghost, in the place in them that wants more, but doesn't translate the more to God, translates it to more
hunger.
Objects. It's a hunger. To be hungry is itself rooted in being human. Human beings, by definition, are hungry. We're hungry for physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual needs. Ultimately, the only truly satisfying need would be if we were one with God. And most of us don't live that way. And it's important to know where your hunger is arising from. And one of the biggest problems we have is that we confuse our hungers. When I'm hungry for intellectual stimulation, I wind up going on a meditation retreat. When I'm hungry for food, I wind up wanting love. And when I'm hungry for love, I wind up eating food. We confuse these four levels of hunger: hunger for the body, hunger of the heart, hunger of the mind, and hunger of the soul.
So go to Romamu and somebody will tell you where the hunger comes from.
Well, we have to make sure that we offer many different menus.
So, talking about offering menus, what will you tell your children in regards to Jewish observance, and how different will their renewal and your teaching be from the one we call renewal today?
That's a good question. You know, we live in New York City, which is thankfully very Jewish. My kids will grow up in a home that's permeated with Yiddishkeit, with Judaism. Not just Judaism, but Yiddishkeit. Judaism that has feeling, that it's alive, that's burning, that's passionate, that's relevant. But they'll also be in the world. There'll be people who are very much involved in the world, and I don't know what they'll make. Again, I have no...
The ultimate renewal is saying, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to make of the things that I'll give them, but I promise to give them everything that I have.
So talking from your children, particular children, to the general children, well, many grow up with lots of support in their Yiddishkeit, like you did, many people grow up with none. How do you bridge the gap? How do you reach out? I mean, the people who come to Romamu are people who already acknowledge their hunger. People don't even know that they're hungry.
Right.
How do you reach out to Jews who are not even on the road?
You know, I think that renewal is unique in its ability actually to have a message for those who are very distant from Judaism, as well as a message for those who are in the ultra-Orthodox community. One of the things you know about Romamu, Sali, is that Romamu has perhaps the broadest demographic of any synagogue that I'm familiar with. You have non-Jews dancing together with ultra-Orthodox Jews who are still in the ultra-Orthodox community. And dancing and singing and everything in between. So one of the unique things about renewal, I think, is that it's a crossover movement. So the way that renewal and the way that I and Romamu are trying to reach out is through programs, through messages that always incorporate both a particular message and a universal message, and practices that open the heart. The best way to tell people that Judaism is amazing is to show them that it works. If we are on fire for transformation, if we are alive and dynamic in our religious life, then people will see this as a path towards a greater life fulfillment.
There are people who you don't see in the shul, not even in Romamu. You go to buy pizza and there's an Israeli there, and just taking a break from Moshe Movies or something, you have 5 minutes, what do you tell him? Do you feel responsible for his Jewish life?
That's the question. So here's what I feel. I don't feel that it's a one-way street. When I see any human being, I think, I wonder what they're going to teach me, and I wonder what it is that I can teach them. And I wonder if in a conversation that we open up, as I get to know him, what it is that I'm doing that might enrich his life, and I wonder if he's interested in that. Otherwise, I run the risk of being objectifying him. If I really believe he's a neshama with its own destiny, then I have to be as curious about how he arrived here as I am about how he might one day arrive at a place that I imagine his soul should be. My hubris isn't that, oh, I must be meeting him because God wants me to bring him back to Torah mitzvot.
So what do you say? First sentence.
מה העניינים? מה שלומך? מאיפה אתה בארץ? מאיפה אתה?
First
מי
of
אתה?
all, we agree on that you reach out to him.
I would, of course, I feel very connected, by the way. I feel connected to a lot of people. I feel a unique connection to an Israeli, but I might strike up a conversation with somebody who I see with a yoga mat. But I have a particular connection with the Israeli, and I'd say to him, if you're interested, we have a beautiful Jewish community that does Judaism in a way.
I left Judaism in Israel. I'm here to make money. What do you say?
I said, and listen, if you're homesick for Judaism, if you're homesick for something that might make your life even more rich,
okay. So you touch on the homesickness.
If it's a home, or not just that, we also have a way to make you rich.
How do you see Jewish law, and how would you define yourself with regard to halacha? Are you a halachic man?
I would say I would be considered to be a practicing halachic Jew, but more often than not, my halacha comes from the conservative movement's approach to Jewish law.
How do you decide your halacha from the Shulchan Aruch halacha?
I think that I very much base my Jewish life on the way that the Shulchan Aruch imagined Jewish life, but I make I have places where I renew the practice in a way that I feel is more relevant for me or more relevant for my community.
How do you allow yourself to interfere with the Jewish practice and to bring yourself to change the rules? That is not necessarily renewal. That can be rebellion. That can be selfishness. That can be lack of discipline. It can be a lot of things. Renewal is a big tent of a lot of verbs. Mm-hmm. But the verb of observing or accepting rules is not necessarily renewal.
Right.
Renewal is an idea.
Again, I feel very firmly rooted within a particular halachic approach that was championed by the conservative movement in its willingness to engage texts on their own terms and engaging, even going to the Talmud to find out decisions and not necessarily abiding only by the Shulchan Aruch. And what I add to that is my own teacher's call to renew halakha by looking at the psycho-spiritual reasoning and motivation behind a given halakha and then adapting it accordingly.
Is it fair to say that there is room for a more flexible and adaptive role of halakha in a changing world, and the rigidity or the inability to change is not different than the Satmar is not accepting Israel? It's just about saying we don't have Sanhedrin, so how many more thousands of years are we going to struggle with the Agunah or Yom Sheni of Yom Tov or things that are losing audience?
I think that's a fair way to say it, Sali. I think that I would say that that our inability to adapt has created much suffering, undue suffering. And so we need to be flexible and adaptable in our approach to halakha.
Is it possible that we have both God and love in the same sentence because they both require an extrasensory tool? We can't see God and we can't see love. They both require extending ourselves, and they are both in the same sentence. Love by God, v'ahavta et Hashem elokecha.
I see.
Doesn't require to love your parents.
Right.
It doesn't say love your parents.
It says v'ahavta et Hashem elokecha, and it says v'ahavta recha kamocha. So there's loving God and loving others are intimately connected. Listen, some say God is love. I wouldn't say that, but I would agree with you that just as love is known and felt and seen, so too we can know God, we can love God, and we can see the expression of God in the world and the expression of love in the world.
So not seeing love, but knowing love is a tool to understand that not seeing God, we may still know Him.
Yeah, I think that's one way of saying it. I think I would probably say that we know, just as the Rambam says, we can imagine what God's love looks like through an analogy to human love.
And then
you fall in love with someone. If I really love them, then often I can't even say why it is that I love them. It's just I fell in love with you. It's the totality of you, and it's an intimacy. And I think that ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is
what?
Very much as my friend Nancy Flam said, kind of paraphrasing Buber, when I speak about God, there's almost nothing that I can say that would be true. But when I speak to God, there's nothing that I could say that wouldn't be. That there's something that happens in the minute that I have a turning from talking about God in the third person to a very intimate moment of being with God. There's nothing that I can say about God. God is love, God isn't love, God is good, God isn't good. We're struggling, our minds don't get around it. The Zohar says, Leis machshava tfisa be'klal, that the mind, there isn't a thought that can capture you, tfisa be, you can't like hold God with a thought. And the Balatani says, just like a hand can't hold a thought, the mind also is equally impossible to hold God. But, and this is where Buber and Nancy were onto something, that when I turn to God and I say, Adonai Sasai Tiftach, that in that turning right there, that's it. That's when God is present for me.
And people know intuitively when to be respectful. The moment you have a private moment with God, it's one of those things where people are aware of a sacred moment. But God and the Torah and Judaism doesn't exist just to be worshipped, but it's a train that goes somewhere. And maybe God's plan is to teach us how to love, and love as a tool to live together, because otherwise we have Babel, we have Dora Mabul, we have the flood, we have inability, Hiroshima. So is it fair to say that to see God's plan, maybe His goal is just for us to love as a tool for coexistence? And He created us in His image, and we as parents do it the same. And children who grow up in happy homes become healthy parents. It's in the DNA of God and love and future and kumbaya.
I hope so. I think that you're onto something. I think that to the extent that we can understand God's purpose in the world, or the purpose of being itself, or the mind of God, or whatever other metaphor you want to use, why we're here essentially, you know, we're groping. But we do know that all the mystical and wisdom traditions essentially say that this is the greatest imaginable school, this life, this university, and we are here in this universe to learn love. Love for self, love for other, love for nation, love for humanity, love for world, love for cosmos.
For ourselves.
I started with that, yeah. So it's not an easy lesson to learn.
I was going to ask you about what is your image of Mashiach and Olam Haba, the world to come, and then I thought to myself, as you were talking, it sounded that that is it.
Yeah, Halavai, that we could build a world where what's called Mashiach Tzeit, that there's a Geist, there's a general recognition. You know, when I'm in shul, I daven, I regularly pray for a world that I would imagine is a perfect world. I don't use my prayer time to imagine in my small mind what kind of world I would want. Me, or us versus them. One of the things in prayer that I hope happens is that people can find a way to pray for the ideal world.